Hello, everyone, and thank you for your patience. In order to allow for plenty of time for the Q&A right after this session, we're just going to go ahead and jump into the session. Just want to reemphasize that this meeting is being recorded, so if at any point you miss any of these parts, we'll be posting that at a later point. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Undocumented/DACAmented Know Your Rights Resources and Info session. We're glad you're able to join us this afternoon, and we hope to make the most of our time here today. My name is Jacob Velasquez. I use he and his pronouns, and I'm the Assistant Director of Centro Chicano y Latino, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar. Now I'll have my on-screen colleagues introduce themselves, beginning with Lisa.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Weissman-Ward, and I am at the Stanford Law School Immigrants Rights Clinic, where I'm a supervising attorney and lecturer and co-teach the clinic, and I go by she and her. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mona Hicks. I'm the Senior Associate Vice Provost and Dean of Students here at Stanford University. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and it's my honor to be here with you today. It is so vitally important for us to support and serve our undocumented and documented students, particularly during this time of COVID, where impacts are cascading and compounding around us. I want to express, again, our deep disappointment with the memorandum from the Department of Homeland Security that reconsidered the legality of DACA, and we intend to, for this time to be the beginning of our journey to reach out and connect with our DACA students who are impacted. One of the things that went out in the message that you received that brought you to this webinar today is that we want to have a sustainable commitment to centering undocumented and documented students at Stanford. And we intend to do that and operationalize that through a working group. And so we ask for students who are interested in serving and in all the ways that we've dedicated support for DACA and undocumented students. Please email the Dean of Students at stanford.edu, Dean of Students at stanford.edu to express your interest, and we will follow up with you. And I want to thank the Stanford Immigrant Rights Clinic and the Stanford Law School for being such an incredible partner with us and giving this presentation today and helping us build more resources on our website. Just right off the bat, I want to make sure that your takeaways from this program today is that it's really, really important for you to take the opportunity to get a free confidential initial consultation with the Stanford Immigrants Rights Clinic. The IRC has a relationship with a reputable firm in San Francisco who could do work with individuals who are temporarily out of the state because of COVID, but where we can refer those who need assistance with DACA renewals and also assist undocumented and documented students with applying for other immigration relief. This is very important. So at the end of this, where you get all the context around where are we with response and legal frames around support for particularly decisions around DACA, certainly we want to reinforce, we can't emphasize enough for you to take that opportunity for free, really excellent consultation and legal support. And lastly, we realize that likely there'll be questions today that have a lot of nuance that are particular for your individual needs. And so we may not be able to answer all of those today, but we are committed and have notes in addition to this recording to make sure that we capture all of those questions and can get answers in a timely manner and consult with the work group and consult with students so that we're giving you the best possible answer and resources to support your needs. So that said, I just want to say thank you all for being here, and thank you so much to Lisa and the IRC for coming to help give us the information that we need to move forward.
Thank you, Mona and Lisa. Before we proceed, I just want to make a few announcements about today's webinar session. First off, we want to acknowledge that we're in the midst of a pandemic that has drastically impacted our daily routine, hence this webinar here today. Given this, we will be recording this session and posting it on the undocumented.stanford.edu webpage by the end of the week for those who are unable to join us today or want to recap and catch anything they might have missed. Secondly, given the sensitive nature of this topic, all individual information will be anonymized. And finally, there will be a time for questions at the end of the FAQs portion. And you're welcome to start those questions now if you click on the Q&A button near the bottom of your screen. Please note that questions can be submitted anonymously, and depending on the number of questions we received, we may not be able to get to them all today. So some questions that may be responded to directly in the text, while others pertaining to a broad context may be forwarded to our panel. If we're unable to get to a particular question, we will post the question with an answer on the undocumented.stanford.edu website after this event. With this, I'll go ahead and let Lisa take us into our session.
Thank you. And I'm just going to wait for, I have a few slides to share with you all that I thought would be helpful in, getting us oriented. And for those that may be more visual, hopefully the slides can also provide some additional assistance and context. So thank you for the invitation to participate. I appreciate that the Dean of Students and Centro Chicano y Latino is continued to want to collaborate with the Immigrants' Rights Clinic at the law school. If we can go to the first overview slide. Actually, yeah, that one is great. So perfect, thank you. So before I jump into substance, I wanna flag a few things. One is that there's a lot to talk about when it relates to DACA and particularly the litigation. The goal of today is not to get into very, very specific legal nuanced discussion about what is the Administrative Procedures Act and how did the court find that there was jurisdiction to decide these issues. That's not the goal of the talk. And the goal of the talk is certainly to provide context and to give you all some background in terms of how we got here. But I really want to frame the conversation around how we got here and what folks can potentially expect. And I'll disclaimer, sorry if this is a buzzkill, but unfortunately there's still a lot of unknowns out there. But the goal is to give you all as much information as we know. So after acknowledgements, I'm going to set the scene, give some history. We'll talk a little bit about lawsuits and litigation, the fight in the courts. Next, we'll talk about what to expect. And then I'll finish with rights and resources. I am going to aim to be done in about 25 minutes, just because I do want to make sure that there is sufficient time to hear from you all in terms of questions. And then the next slide would be great. Thank you. So before I get into substance, I want to take a moment and pause and acknowledge two things. First of all, I live in San Francisco, but I'm speaking to you all from San Diego. I'm here for a few weeks with my 5-year-old and 8-year-old, who hopefully are happily distracted doing Scratch Junior or Roblox. But if you hear children in the background, apologies in advance. We came for clean air. My father is a former teacher and principal, and I was hoping for an extra hand with distance learning. But the very strict Jamaican that I grew up with has actually turned into quite a pushover when it comes to his grandchildren. In any event, I tell you that to apologize in advance for children's voices, but also importantly to acknowledge that while I'm here, I'm physically on the Kumeyaay land, the indigenous land of the Kumeyaay. The second acknowledgement that I want to make is, it relates directly to the material today in our discussion around DACA. The DACA movement and the movement to support undocumented youth and young people is a product of grassroots and community organizing. It is a movement that is led, first and foremost by directly impacted communities and specifically by directly impacted youth. It's a movement that is energized and has been successful because of the power of storytelling. It is also a movement that's been consistently and powerfully rejecting the notion of good versus bad immigrant. This dichotomy that in my opinion is a false one, that there's a group of deserving and that there's a group of undeserving. To the contrary, this movement has been founded on the premise of all of us or none of us. And I make this acknowledgement because while much of the discussion is going to talk about the lawsuits and the agencies and the courts and the lawyers and the system, the reality is that none of these actors would be involved and none of these lawyers would have work to do if it weren't for the activists and organizers on the ground who've been at the forefront in this movement. And yes, I'm a lawyer and I'm proud to be one, but I want to make it clear that the lawyering could not be done if there weren't folks on the ground pushing us to do this important lawyering. Okay. So jumping into the substance, I thought I would spend a few minutes talking about the history of DACA and the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act was actually introduced nearly 2 decades ago in 2001. It has been introduced in various iterations over the last 19 years. In fact, 10 different versions have been introduced into Congress. Clearly, none of them have passed. And 2 decades later, it is still not law. Part of this relates to failures of Congress, but part of this also relates to what I noted earlier about the all of us or none of us, which is that the DREAM Act, viewed as a legislative fix, would only have protected a relatively small minority of undocumented individuals in the US. And organizers who've been pushing for this meaningful legislative reform have opposed a fix that would leave out the community's elders, that would leave out the parents, the grandparents, the aunties, the uncles, a fix that would leave out individuals that had interactions with the criminal justice system, a justice system that we know disproportionately impacts folks of color, folks with language access or language barriers, folks of different economic strata. And so because the organizers have consistently raised up the motto, all of us or none of us, not only has there been opposition to a DREAM Act from within Congress, but also for different reasons, there has not been the same widespread support from directly impacted communities. And then that brings us to June of 2012. I think the writing was on the wall that there was not going to be legislative comprehensive reform during Obama's administration. But there was still organizing. And so during his first term and by executive order, he did announce DACA. I will note that there's still a divide between deserving and undeserving. The idea that DACA is for folks who through no fault of their own and innocent, a lot of that language was used in creating DACA, but because it wasn't a full legislative fix by Congress, it wasn't that we were necessarily buying into this as some permanent measure with this dichotomy. And I think there's still a hope that in the future there will be comprehensive immigration reform. So that was back in June 2012 that Obama announced DACA. 2.5 years later, he announced 2 things. One was the expansion of DACA. There was a couple ways it was to be expanded. One was that it raised the age limit, so increased the pool of potential applicants who would be who could apply for DACA. It also extended the period of deferred action from 2 years to 3 years. Along with that announcement came an announcement of an additional discretionary or prosecutorial discretion program called DAPA, which refers to the deferred action for parents of Americans and lawful permanent residents. The idea was this would be a similar program, but aimed at the parents. And so, or at some parents. You might be wondering, or this may not sound super familiar to you, and the reason is it actually never came to be. It was never in fact implemented, and that's because just a few short months after the announcement of the expansion and the initiation of DAPA, Texas plus 26 other states sued to block it and stop it. So it never actually, they never even accepted any applications on either of these expanded forms of discretion. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. There was a split decision of 4-4, And I should say that the decision below in Texas was a decision that agreed that the expansion of DACA and DAPA were unlawful. So up to the Supreme Court and a split decision in 2016. And you may, for those of you who are law students or pre-law or political science majors or just Supreme Court buffs, you might be saying 4 to 4, that only adds up to 8. I thought that there was 9 justices. Well, there are, but we did have a period of time after Justice Scalia passed that there was only 8 justices on the Supreme Court bench. And so because of that split 4-4 decision, the Texas decision was upheld and expanded DACA, and newly announced DAPA just never came to be. Fast forward some years later, January 2017, Trump is sworn into office. As many of you all remember from his campaign, he regularly announced and made promises to eliminate DACA. He said that was going to be one of the very, very, very first things that he did. And so some of us were surprised that it actually took him 9 months to formally announce the termination of DACA. Although certainly that first week and those first months of office, he did many other, in my opinion, problematic, illegal, and xenophobic action as it relates to immigration. But in September of 2017, he formally announced the termination of DACA. And from September 2017 through today, there's just been lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. And it ultimately went up to the Supreme Court. A couple different cases were argued together. There was different cases out of different courts in different states. And it went up to the Supreme Court. And this summer, just June 18, 2020, the Supreme Court issued its big decision. We can move to, thank you for the next slide. So the decision was long awaited. And I will say, and from having spoken to some folks that are on this webinar, most of us were very pessimistic and expected it to be a full destruction of DACA. And that has nothing to do with the quality and amazing advocacy that the legal teams were doing on the ground. It didn't look good, particularly with the makeup of the court. But June came around and they issued their big decision. And part of it was a win. They decided 2 very important things. One was they decided that as a court, they did have the ability or the jurisdiction to review the issue. Some of us thought they may just say, we don't have the ability to decide this issue at all. And the second part, which is, I think, the part that folks were most focused on, was the fact that they said that the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, their justifications for terminating DACA were arbitrary and capricious, which is a fancy legal way of saying not good enough. There's a legal standard, and from an administrative law perspective, if you are going to terminate a policy or an executive order, it's got to be done in a thoughtful way. And they said you didn't do it this way, despite having written multiple memos about this. Importantly, this is what it did not say. It did not say that DHS is prohibited from terminating DACA in the future. In fact, it said the opposite. There's a quote early on in the decision that says, the dispute before the court is not whether DHS may rescind DACA. All parties agree that it may. So after that, the question is, well, what next? And as advocates and organizers and directly impacted communities, folks waited. Initially, and I think to this day, it's many scholars' belief and lawyers' belief that the decision reinstated the original 2012 DACA, which would have meant people can apply for the first time, people can continue to renew, and people can apply for what's called advanced parole, which allows certain individuals to leave the country and come back with permission, as opposed to getting stuck outside of the country. And one thing that I realized I didn't flag is that from the litigation, after there was lawsuits filed in 2015, there was a pause on new applications. So there had not been initial applications for some time. And so many of us thought, well, this is a time now that folks that missed that window can actually apply for the first time. But we needed to wait to see what are the forms going to say? What is the application going to say? The reality is you have to send paperwork to an agency and they have to be ready and willing to accept it. Of course, if they're not, there's lawsuits, but in terms of from a practical matter, how are they going to respond? And at first it was silence, hence the little gif of the cricket chirping. Silence for longer than I think we thought. The next thing that happened was a statement on the United States Citizenship and Immigration website, which is the agency it's within DHS that's responsible for reviewing these applications and deciding. A statement that was a surprise, although maybe thinking about it, not a surprise given the administration, but it was a fairly stunning rebuke of the Supreme Court, and we found it bold, and it was a very, very significant critique. Basically, said that the Supreme Court was wrong, which from an agency was surprising. And then about a month went by, and then the memos started to come. We had a memo in late July, and we had a memo last month in August. Next slide, thank you. And based on the memos, we're at a point where we know certain information, and we still don't know other information. So what we do know is the following. We know that first-time applications are being rejected. So if you have never applied for DACA and you apply now, your application will be rejected. I guess the one good thing is they're not keeping your money. When they reject those applications, they are returning fees. The $495, which is the fee, they are returning it. One thing I just want to flag here is that if you did in this window apply for the first time and you were rejected, or perhaps you're waiting on that paperwork to be sent back, save that documentation. It may be that with the continued lawsuits and litigation, there may be ways that this is very speculative, but there perhaps could be ways that if you applied within a certain window and were rejected, you may be able to benefit if there's some lawsuit that ends up winning in the future. To be clear, this is not a suggestion that folks go out and apply for the first time just because there may be something down the line. I would strongly, strongly recommend that if you have not applied before, but you're curious about whether there's some benefit to applying now, even knowing it will be rejected, that you consult with an immigration attorney to talk about the calculus, the risks and benefits that are ultimately going to be your choice. But we think it's really important to at least have that information to be able to weigh the pros and cons, the risks and the benefits before making that decision. In terms of renewals, there was some significant changes here. The good news is that they have started accepting renewals again. And so if you had DACA, you can continue to apply and renew it. The window for renewing has, per one of the memos, has been adjusted to 120 to 150 days before your expiration. So that's 4 to 5 months before your work permit were to expire. So if your work permit is set to expire March 3rd, 2021, then count back 4 to 5 months and apply within that window. The other updates from the memo were that advanced parole is going to be nearly impossible, we think. That might be a little bit of an overstatement, but they're limiting it to extraordinary and exceptional circumstances. So getting granted advanced parole is not likely. And the biggest difference here is that where grant of deferred action under DACA gave you deferred action and work permit for 2 years in the past, now it is only for 1 year. So that is a significant change, that instead of applying every 2 years, it will be 1. that's what we know so far. And we do know that USCIS, which is the agency that's charged with accepting and adjudicating these applications, is starting to accept them. What we don't know a lot. We don't know if and when the administration will ultimately issue another formal rescission or termination of the program. The July 28th memo that I referred to on the other slide comes from the acting DHS Secretary, Chad Wolf. And in that memo, if folks want to take a look at it, you can just Google Chad Wolf DACA memo, July 28th. He makes clear his intent. He also makes clear that he's aware of what the Supreme Court says, which is if you're going to terminate, you have to do it the right way. And so I think it's to be determined and to be seen when and if they will seek to formally terminate again. One thing that I should say is when they announced the initial termination back in September of 2017, they were still going to be a rollout of DACA, of the termination of it. Maybe that rollout and termination probably contradict one another, but it wasn't going to be that the day of the memo, all people with DACA no longer had DACA. It was going to be that folks would be phased out of DACA status. And from a logistical procedural standpoint, one could imagine that if they intended or sought to terminate again, it would be something similar. Something else that we don't know is if the administration will try to make additional changes to the benefits of DACA. So they already changed the ability to get advanced parole, making the standard more difficult. They've already changed it from 2 years to 1 year. There could be additional changes that come down. One would think that if they were going to do it, they would just do it in a single memo. But that's not to say that they couldn't make additional changes. The other thing that we don't know is whether the pending lawsuits may change the ability of individuals to apply for DACA for the first time. As I've mentioned, the one group that's continued to not have any interim relief during this litigation has been individuals that never applied for DACA, but would otherwise be eligible for. And the lawsuits at this point are still focused on that group in addition to others, but we just don't know of the timing of the lawsuits. If there was something positive in one of these lawsuits, the government could certainly seek to put that positive gain on pause as they seek to challenge it, which is what happened before. So those are just some of the bigger unknowns. And again, I wish that I could see into the future or had more information about what the plans and what might be coming down the pike, but unfortunately none of us know that right now. Thank you. So given that there's so many unknowns, there are a few things that we know folks are focusing on. So there are continued lawsuits. All the cases that went up to the Supreme Court have gone back down, and folks are still courageously, both the plaintiffs and the lawyers, and energetically litigating. And so those continue. They're all have different procedural postures with different things happening. There's a website I'm going to refer to momentarily, which gives some of the updates for those that want to get more into the weeds of the status of those lawsuits. We also know that folks continue to organize, not only around DACA, but more generally as it relates to the election. And then the other thing that we know is that there is a significant and hefty focus on post-election and the potential for legislative reform, some type of comprehensive legislative reform. Yes, I started off saying we've been trying for 2 decades and don't have anything, but we'll see if there's movement in terms of a comprehensive legislative reform. But certainly with a different administration, one could potentially see a full reinstatement of DACA again. Again, that doesn't mean that there won't be challenges, just like they were by Texas and the 26 other states back in 2015, but that could be something that we see as well. And then I think it's the last slide. So I have just a few minutes. I'm at a little over 21 minutes, so making pretty good time here. And apologies for the fast pace. I've been told I speak quickly. I think I also do when I'm excited about the information. A few reminders here. The banner here says Power Over Panic, and I want to give credit to the organizers, particularly in California, that have been really using this lens and this frame to engage with community and directly impacted community. We know that one of the tactics of the administration has been to incite panic and incite fear, and frankly, they've been really successful at it. And so something to think about is harnessing the power, because the panic and the fear and the hysteria, even though it is absolutely legitimate and real, it takes away from, I think, the ability to continue to organize, and in fact, only gives power to those that are seeking to engage in my personal opinion, would be unjust and xenophobic and racist immigration policies. So what can you do? These are just 3 examples. There's much more. As Dean Hicks mentioned in the beginning, getting an individualized consultation to assess whether there may be alternative paths. So the Stanford Law School Immigrants' Rights Clinic, as Dean Hicks mentioned, is absolutely available for free and confidential consultations. We've been doing them for years. We will continue to do them. We are committed to doing them and supporting the undocumented and documented student body. There, as Dean Hicks mentioned, there are other resources for more long-term support, and we may be in a position to provide referrals, certainly to the one firm that we have a close working relationship with at this point. The second thing is know your rights. There are many materials, and we could have a whole nother conversation. I think actually we had one, maybe it was 2 or 3 years ago, with El Centro and the Immigrants' Rights Clinic and a couple community-led organizing groups in Santa Clara County. But there's lots of materials in terms of if confronted by an immigration officer, what information do you or don't you have to share? We strongly encourage folks and impacted community members to carry red cards or have them in their home. They're small little business cards. Actually, that I'm really proud to say the Immigrants' Rights Clinic and students many years ago developed in partnership with the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. It's essentially, you stick it under the door, and it's got, it's in English and in Spanish and a number of other languages as well. And you say that you're not opening the door unless there's a warrant. And to be clear, often immigration will show up and will have what looks like a warrant. But it's not sufficient. In order to access your home, they need a signed warrant by a judge, not by an immigration officer or official. So having those red cards can be useful. It can be quite intimidating to say to someone who's pounding on the door, I don't have I have the right not to speak with you. So this is a way to just slide it under the door. I also encourage folks to have hotline numbers on hand in the event that there is any enforcement activity. For those of you who are in California, and particularly the Bay Area, and I realize that normally we might all be local, but because of COVID, many of you all are with family or friends or in other places, and maybe not the Bay Area. But the Bay Area has an incredible collection of rapid response networks, and California as a state has some really is very impressive. There is a link to the California Collaborative for Immigrant Justice. They have a whole landing page dedicated to the network numbers, but they have network numbers depending on the county. So if you're in certain counties in Central Valley versus Santa Clara versus San Francisco versus Marin, there are different numbers. Have those on hand. And as it relates to enforcement, part of this is underscores the power over panic. If you suspect an enforcement action, it is not useful to post on social media until and unless it has been confirmed. We've seen many panicked communities, and again, panicked for good reason, thinking that there's an enforcement action happening when in fact maybe the ICE van was filling up for gas at a neighborhood gas station. So one of the ways you can confirm enforcement activity is actually to call one of these hotlines. So just be careful. I know we're in a day and age where social media can be incredibly, incredibly powerful for getting out the word, but just be aware that getting out the word before it's been confirmed can actually do exactly what the goal of inciting fear, it can achieve that goal. And then lastly, connect to the resources here at Stanford and to the organizing coalitions and legal organizations in California and around the country. I know at the end we're going to share some other links, but on the right, this right-hand column for resources, I gave the first 3 websites are phenomenal in terms of keeping folks updated on the day-to-day changes as it relates to DACA and the fight before the courts. So California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance, the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, which is local, National Immigrant Law Center, national, headquartered in LA, and then our website at the Immigrant Rights Clinic. We do our best to try to keep folks up to date. I would refer to the first 3 before that because that it is literally in there. One of the things that they're focused on is getting information out quickly. And then as I mentioned, the last link is for folks looking for information about enforcement activities and resources for individuals who may be subject to enforcement activity or who may be arrested and detained. And I think that's my last slide. So I will pass it over and just say thank you all so much for being here. And I think there's some questions coming in and look forward to answering them along with others the best I can.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm going to go ahead and start popping up some of these questions here. Let me just pull these up here. Use the technical difficulties. There we go. All righty. So we're going to go ahead and start off with the first question here. So first question, could we get help if our families are facing legalization troubles?
So I think the question is where the family members are. So from the Stanford Law School Immigrants Rights Clinic, just from a capacity perspective, we're not in a position to provide consultation to individuals who are not directly affiliated with Stanford, unfortunately, but we do have many, many, many contacts and referrals. And so if you're in this position, you are welcome to reach out to the clinic and we can provide you, well, we're gonna need to know a number of things, including where is that family member. A lot of the referrals are very local and specific to where that individual is. And so while the Immigrants Rights Clinic may not be in a position to provide that consultation with a family member, we would be happy to provide referrals. And we do have a list of referrals on our webpage. Most of them are local, but we do have access to a number of other, not quite databases, but web pages where you can identify where someone lives and where nonprofits may be or private firms that can assist.
Excellent. Next question, are there plans to create an undocumented/documented student center at Stanford?
We have a process for establishing centers and centralized spaces around different student identities and needs. There is not a plan at this time to have an undocumented and documented center. What we hope to do what we plan to do is collaborate with Bechtel as that center is kind of reevaluating and reorganizing their center and work and support and measure the extent to which between all of our community center touch points, we can fold into the possible restructuring and dedication for more advocacy connection through Bechtel.
Excellent. Next question, do you know if Stanford allows DACA, folks without DACA or undocumented graduate students to be TAs or RAs with payment being processed through either scholarships or tuition waivers rather than salaries?
That's a really good question. What I understand is that we do provide stipends to students who identify as DACA or undocumented, but I can't speak to at this time, and we'll get a follow-up answer for the nuance for graduate students and TAs and other opportunities, because I think there's a variance of opportunities across all of the other kind of employment opportunities on campus. And so we want to make sure we're caring for all the differences and distinctions there. So we'll follow up on that.
Following question I have is, I applied to renew my DACA application and I'm still waiting. I applied to renew before the new memo was announced, the change from 2 years to 1 year. And Lisa, I believe this question was already addressed, but assuming the renewal application is approved again, will I get a 2-year work permit or a 1-year work permit?
Great. So if you applied to renew your DACA before the memo, but you haven't yet been approved, unfortunately, the memo does say that if you haven't yet been approved, when you do get approved, that work permit will only be for 1 year. And I want to make clear that the memo also says that if you applied to renew your work permit and it was granted and you got a 2-year work permit, you're not going to lose that. You get to stay with your 2-year work permit as long as you already have it in hand. But anyone that has an application that is pending now or intends to file again in the future will be limited to the 1-year work permit. Of course, currently you can still renew, but you'll have to renew every year instead of 2.
And kind of following on that same topic, are there resources to pay for a DACA renewal if the program begins to accept new renewals or new applications again?
Yes, we have resources to help assist students with their DACA renewals. And they can simply email Dean of Students at stanford.edu for that support.
Excellent. And I have another question focused on what happens if my DACA is rescinded or I lose my work authorization. I'm not sure if that's in the context of whether it's an on-campus job or in terms of the student status.
And I'm happy to answer in the context of immigration status and potential risk, but in terms of, I'll defer the student status question to Dean Hicks. If your DACA is rescinded or if it expired and you didn't renew, you would revert to the status that you had prior, which presumably would be undocumented. One of the second memo that came out that I referenced in August referred to the information sharing between USCIS, which is in charge of reviewing the DACA applications, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, which is the police arm, the enforcement arm of the agency. They continue to say that that they will not regularly refer individuals who've been denied or have their DACA rescinded. I should say denied. They won't regularly refer individuals whose DACA has been denied or if it's lapsed for enforcement. At some point, they were a lower, folks who had DACA or in theory could qualify for DACA were a lower priority in terms of enforcement. This administration, though, has made clear that everybody's a priority. Of course, there are limited resources, so I do think that they are prioritizing. So I think if DACA has been rescinded and there's been an affirmative act to take away DACA, it's probably worth consulting with a lawyer if you haven't, just to understand what could be potential risks in terms of immigration initiating a formal removal proceeding. One thing to know about formal removal proceedings is you have rights there as well, and it's a process that can take time. A lot of folks think that it's an immediate, within hours, within days, removal or physical deportation, and that's typically not the case.
Did you want to add to that, Dean Hicks?
Yes, thank you. There's a lot of good information that Lisa just shared. I think the most important thing is when, if I understand the question correctly, when students' status is changed or no longer renewed, I think the first step is to always go back and check in and take that opportunity to get a consultation. And then also to make sure that you've updated your status with the university. You're still a Stanford student and we want to care for you and support you. So we want to know so that we know how to support you. So that's ultimately the intent there. But certainly take as many opportunities to get a consultation when your status changes as well.
Thank you. This next question states, how long does the process take to reach a legal advice for DACA at Stanford? I've sought assistance out, but haven't heard from someone in 3 weeks.
What I'll say is, it's probably worth making sure everybody's seeking out to get assistance in the same way. And so maybe I'll defer to folks at El Centro or maybe Dean Hicks. How we typically learn that someone wants a consultation. Sometimes people contact us directly, but usually it goes through, there's an email address for dreamers@stanford.edu. That was being checked not by the Immigrants' Rights Clinic, but that would then be referred to us where appropriate. So maybe I will, Margaret just put the email address in the chat box. If you did send that request for help to that email, maybe message, I'm not, someone El Centro or maybe the dean's office to follow up.
I could chime in for a little bit, Lisa. So in the resources presentation we have a little bit up ahead, we will be having some contact emails that so it's like Lisa mentioned, folks at El Centro and with the Dean of Students Office. So you can go ahead and feel free to reach out to us to kind of inquire if a significant time has passed so we can follow up on that and see if there might be something that came up or if, for example, there might be some administrative follow through to go through. Did you want to add to that, Dean Hicks, or?
The bottom line is let us know. So certainly the Dean of Students email is in the chat and we will follow up on your behalf. And also we will answer what that process is and a follow-up on the website. So it's very clear of who has your information and how we care for that. But in the meantime, if you've been waiting 3 weeks, please let us know and we will get you the support that you need as soon as possible, as soon as we can.
And I should say, once the request comes to us, we're typically able to schedule a consultation within a week. I don't know that we've ever had to push it beyond a week unless there was some extraordinary circumstance. So once that request comes to us, we're typically able to schedule something pretty quickly.
Excellent. I do want to be conscious of the time. We'll be taking about 1 or 2 more questions and then referring for the last part of this session here. Following question from students. So Dean Hicks mentioned some sort of stipends for undocumented graduate students who are looking for financial support. Where could an undocumented student get more information about this?
Again, just so we have clarity in what types of support resources are available, we will do the research and post that on the website as soon as we can. So it's very clear how to navigate that. It gets very complicated based upon your graduate level, types of opportunities and funding. And so we want to make sure we honor giving you the proper information.
Thank you. The final question that we're going to be posting on this session. For staff, professors, or clinicians who want to support students, is it possible to schedule a consultation with Immigrants' Rights Clinic? Or if there is another way to reach out and get advice or suggestions while supporting students?
Great. And we love, I mean, to work in community and in collaboration with one another to make sure that our students have as much support as possible, we're all for. And so I think if you are interested in talking, you're welcome to email me. I'll put my email, or my email's on the Stanford Immigrants Rights Clinic website. You're welcome to email to check in. I think one of the things just to flag is a lot of times the specific ways to support are really nuanced and very specific and may involve private details. So it may be that there's general questions we can help support and brainstorm ways to engage and support undocumented and documented students. I think that if the idea was, I have a student who's in this situation, what should he or she do? We probably may not be in a position to respond just out of respect for confidentiality. But we love working with you all.
Sorry, Lisa. I did just want to get to this last question because we had multiple of these come up. But the question centered around students who turn 21 years of age and are able to sponsor their families with to get them started on that legal documentation process. I don't know if we can mention if there's any avenues of support. I know, Lisa, I think you mentioned about referring them out to local organizations that may be able to assist with that.
Yeah, so again, I think, so yes, the 20, you are right, the 21, when a US citizen turns 21, they have the ability to file a family-based visa petition for certain relatives, including parents. What is much more complicated is what that ends up looking like. There's many different steps, and depending on how that family member, that mom or dad, entered the country, they may be able to do the process here, or they may have to go back to their country of origin and do the process there. So there's a lot of different nuanced, very specific questions depending on the details. I think that if these are questions you have, it is worth letting us know where you are, and then we can provide some basic overview, but also referrals to organizations that are in a better position to help with those long-term cases.
And then just to clarify, so that's for students to be able to reach out to the Immigrants Rights Clinic with those questions to get consultation on that. I mean, referrals for that.
Yeah, referrals. I think the consultation part is hard because a lot of times the questions that we need to ask are questions actually that the parents have answers to, maybe not the kids, and those details, but how someone crossed is a critical detail to whether what their options are. So, but we can certainly try to assist with referrals and giving folks names and numbers of trusted nonprofits or private firms, depending on where they are.
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move us on to the last section here. We do want to post some important resources for your reference. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen one more time here. So excuse any technical gaps here. All right, let's try this again here. All right. So we do want to recognize that at Stanford, we are committed to supporting students, and we also want to recognize that there's a bunch of national and local organizations that are doing amazing work in supporting students and their families. Some of the local resources that we have listed here, excuse me, this thing is right here. We have listed right here. So these are all within the SF Bay Area. CLESPA, which we have listed right there first, actually has a working relationship with the Immigrants Rights Center. And a couple of these other ones are located here in SF. Let me just get this out of the way here. There we go. Okay. Carecen SF is the Central American Resource Center, and that's this one right here. The Asian Americans for Advancing Justice is also another local nonprofit based out of SF. SF CARE stands for San Francisco Coalition of Asylee, Immigrant, and Refugee Services. And then there's the Undocumented SF. So I just want to emphasize that this PowerPoint will also be posted on the website, so we can come back and refer to these links as well. Some national organizations that are doing amazing work in advocating for immigrants' rights. UnitedWeDream.org, HomeIsHere.us, InformedImmigrant.com, undocumentedstudentlife.org. I can share it personally. I've referred a couple of students, especially undocumented students who want to pursue graduate education. They have a bunch of personal testimonies and resources for students who are interested, but might be undocumented or with DACA. And finally, have South Asian Americans Leading Together.org. And lastly here, we do want to emphasize our staff contacts as well as our emails for the Dean of Students Office. We are all here to help connect and support undocumented students and DACA students. So I just want to emphasize Centro Chicano y Latino and Dean of Students Office are available for contact for any questions and to offer support. And as a final takeaway, one of the best ways for students to get information and guidance on immigration topics is to do an informed intake with Stanford's Immigrants Rights Clinic. So consultations, as a reminder, are free and confidential for students, and you can find more information by searching law.stanford.edu/immigrants-rights-clinic. Additionally, for access to a group chat for undocumented and DACA students at Stanford, please contact Margaret Sena or Elvira Prieto or myself at El Centro, whose emails are listed right here, so we can get you connected to that resource as well. Finally, this concludes our webinar for today, and I want to thank everyone for attending and sharing your time with us. Please look for more information and recording of this session today at undocumented.stanford.edu once we get that posted later today. And I want to say, Mona or Lisa, any final concluding thoughts?
I want to thank Lisa for the presentation today and all the good work that's being done at the Stanford Immigration Rights Clinic. And I want to thank everyone for participating, and please stay engaged with us. Please reach out with your questions and support. And we look forward to walking this Stanford journey with you and supporting you. Thank you.
And I just reiterate the thanks for those of you who joined, and to the Office of the Dean of Students and to El Centro, and look forward to working in collaboration and partnership with you all, and also with you all as students and staff and faculty.
Thank you again, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and take care.